Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be looking at the basics of testing in React using Jest. The project we're going to be using for this video is the calculator app that I've done in a previous video. If you have watched that video, then great, then you should be up to speed. If not, you can go ahead and watch it if you want to learn how to make the actual calculator. It might give you a better understanding of some of the things that we're trying to test today as well. However, if you just want to skip to the testing part, then we can also just clone the repository that we created in that video. I'll leave a link to that repository in the description down below. And if you go to that link, then you can click on code and get the HTTPS URL to clone it. And we're just going to be cloning that into our local directory. And then I'm going to do git clone, and this will be the tutorial. So there we go, I've cloned it down, and then now I'm going to open it up in Visual Studio Code. Now we've got the project open in Visual Studio Code, and if I go ahead and open up the terminal in here so that we can run a yarn, so this will install all the packages that we need for this project. Cool. And let's just do a yarn start, and I'll show you guys the application that we're actually going to be working on today if you haven't seen it already. It's just a basic calculator app, and as you can see, we can do some basic operations on it. We have a clear function, we can do multiply, and so on. All the functionality that you would expect to find in a calculator, and we go into much more detail about how to create this in the previous video. So if you're interested in it, then go and check it out. So today what we want to do is switch to the branch that has no tests in it. So the main branch will already contain the tests as I've already committed them, but let's just check out the no tests branch. So now if we go to this file, we can see that there is a test set up in here, renders equal button, but we won't be using that today. We're just going to be starting from scratch. So I'm just going to save that, and let's go ahead and make a start on writing our first test. So in this application, we already have the test file set up. This is given to us when we use the create React app, so we haven't had to do any additional setup for the tests. These files were already in here. So what we want to do is first define a describe tag, which will be just done like this, and we can enter in a name that will describe our suite of tests. So we're just going to call it calculator app test, as we're going to be doing all of our tests within this file. If we were testing multiple different components, we could give this a name of like that specific component. For example, if we were writing a test specifically for grid digit button, we could say describe grid digit button component. But for now, we're just going to use this. And then in the second parameter, you want to just define a function, and this will contain all of your tests. And the way you define a test is either by doing test, following the same pattern as we did with the describe. So we'll give the test a name. So let's just call the first test renders calculator. And then in this test, we will check that it actually renders all of the components that we want it to render. The other way you could also do is doing it, which is just shorthand for the test keyword. But we'll just continue using that. And then in here, what we want to do, actually, let's just go ahead and run that right now. If we do yarn test, we can see that this will now run a watcher that is watching our test files and watching all the updates that we do. There are a few different things you can do in here. If you have a large project, for example, you could press P and then give the specific file that you want to run, so you don't have to run all of your tests at once. But in our case, we only have one file, so we're just going to leave it like this for now. And as you can see, it's passing. We're not actually testing anything, so it's not expecting anything to fail. And then in here, what we can do is do render, and then we want to render our actual app component. So app like this. And this is the same thing that we are rendering inside our index.tsx, as you can see here. As you can see, I'm not bothering with rendering all these other things because I'm not going to be testing them. If I were going to test the theme properties in this application, then I would include this inside my render here. So now if I go ahead and just save that, we can see that it will run and the test will render this, and it doesn't show us anything, but the test runner is running that and able to inspect all of its elements. And what we will then do is basically tap into those elements and assert that things are the way they're supposed to be. So the first things first, actually, what we should do is in this app, I want to check that this output is being displayed. So this is the value that's being updated in our app. So what I'll do is I want to define a data test ID on this container where we display the value. So what we'll do is in here, we will define data-test ID equals, and then we'll give it a name, something like output. And if we save that, our output container should now contain a data test ID. If we want to inspect this as we go along, it's useful to know how this works, because you need to inspect element a lot when you're testing, just so that you know exactly what element you're selecting to test. So as you can see here, this div is now also displaying a data test ID property on the tag. So now we should be able to access that within our test. So let's go ahead and define the output element, and what we'll do is do screen dot get by test ID. As you could see, as I was doing that, there's loads of different selectors that you can use, and there are different ways of actually getting those elements from the DOM. And so in here, we're just going to be doing get by test ID output. This is by far the easiest way to get an element, as you can specifically put on the element that you want the exact ID that you want to get in the test. So in here, I've now selected this output div and put that element into this variable. And then what I want to do is just do expect output. I could do to be visible, and then this will just check that this element is actually visible when the test runs. But I want to take this a little bit further and say, rather than just it being visible, I want it to say to have text content of 0. So this will check that this div has text content of 0, and if I change this to 10, for example, you'll see that this should now fail, because it's expecting it to be 10, but it's actually 0. And here you can see these are quite useful to look at when your test fails, because it tells you this test failed and expected to have text content of 10, but it received 0, and it tells you where in your test it failed. So let's change that back to 0. I'm going to define buttons now to try and get all of the buttons of the calculator, and the way we'll do that is we'll do screen.get all by role. So now we're trying to get all of the roles in the screen that all the elements in the screen that has a role of button. So that this should give us every single button that's being rendered. So in this app, I know, as I've calculated it before, we have 19 different buttons. So one test that I can do to simply check that all of these buttons is being rendered, I can do expect buttons dot length to be 19. And then when this runs, it should be able to find that there are 19 buttons. And now if I want to test specifically all of the number buttons to actually be there, what I'll do is I'll do a for loop. Just do for loop Visual Studio Code didn't want to help me out. That's fine. I'll write it out myself. I equals 0. I is less than 9. So we get all of that numbers, all of the numbers in there. I plus plus. And then in here, what we'll do is we'll expect. So expect is the assertion. And then we'll do screen.get by role. This time, instead of get all by role, we're getting one specific button by role. And in here, I'm going to do button. And then I'll say the specific name of the item that I want to get. And all I'm going to do is do a string interpolation of I, which will get that specific number. And then I'll just do a check in here. So to see that it's in the document. Or I could do to be visible, but this is a different way of doing it. So now when I run that, you can see that has worked. If I change this to 10 and it tries to look for a button with a number 10 on it, that also works. 15. Okay, somehow it's found the number 10. Okay, no, it did fail at 10. Could not find with role button and name 10. So yeah, there you go. And I also want to check that all of these other buttons are also in here. So I have a snippet from earlier, which I will just paste in like this. Here, I'm doing the same thing as I'm doing here with button, but I'm specifically putting in the symbols and text that I want to test. And if I now save that, you can see that that passes. So I could have also done something like this where I break it out into another variable and then assert on that later on, but that's only needed if you're going to be using it multiple times. I just did this here to show you guys that you can do this. Most of the time you're only going to be testing it once, so you can just put your selector inside the expect just like that. So actually, I've realized what's wrong with this piece of code here. It's because we're doing 0 to 8 because this is less than 9. That's why 10 was working earlier, because it actually is checking up until 9 when we have it as 10. So actually the correct code should be like this, and that should still work. So just to talk about what this expect is a function that comes out of Jest, and it takes in an element or a selector, something that selects an element on the page, and out of that you can do different types of assertions on it, like to be in document, to be 19, and a lot of different other stuff as well. So if I give you an example here, we did dot, you can see here this is all the different types of assertions you can do. You can even do to have style, to have focus, to have error message, and so on. So depending on what you want to test, you can test different things. Okay, so now that we've proved that we can render the app and that's been tested, let's move on to our next test. So for the next test, what we'll test is that it can do some functionality. So let's do the addition functionality, and we'll just call this test does addition correctly. So what we'll do in here, we'll render the app again. Now what we want to do is actually trigger events by the user. So in order to do this, we need to import one more thing from testing library React, and that is fire event. So what we can do is use fire event to trigger certain user events in the test. So here what I'll trigger is a click, and we want to try and click on a button. So I need to use a selector to find the button. So get by role, and I'll select button followed by the name, and let's just go with something simple just to prove that the addition is working. So now that I've selected this button, I've clicked on number 1. And the next thing I want to do is let's just click on number 0, which will make 10, and then we can click on the plus button followed by the number 5, and then we'll hit the equals button. So now what we should expect the output to be is 5. So if I do this myself here, if I do 1, 0, there's a problem in my code. This should be 0, 1, 0 plus 5 equals 15. So I should be able to use this code here to assert that the output of this is 15. And I don't actually need this whole bit of code to be in another variable, so I can get rid of it. And I just need to change this to 15. And we should see the addition being worked correctly. There has been some console.logs left in there, so let me just go ahead and remove these from our development so it doesn't pollute our tests. There you go, it does the addition correctly. If this was any other number, this should fail. As you can see, expected 16, received 15. So that proves that our code works. So now you can see that we're starting to build up a pattern of the things that we're testing. We know all the different types of functionality that this application should do, and that's what we should try and tackle. So for the calculator, we can carry on testing the different types of functionality. So the next one I'd like to do is do subtraction. And in this case, we'll just change this to a minus. And the output should now be 5 instead. So if I go and save that, that's another one working. So now let's do it again and test the multiply function. And change the minus to multiply. And this time the result should be 50. It passes again. Now on to the next one. And as you can see, this is like a very easy thing for us to test because a calculator is a very simple application, but it can get very complicated. Okay, so the divide I need to copy because I don't have the divide symbol. So this should give us value of 2. And there you go. We've tested all the basic functionality of the calculator app by doing these. So we can even take this further to test the other buttons so that we completely cover all of our functionality in our unit tests. So the first one maybe we can do is to do the clear button. So let me just copy and paste this test again, and I'll change this to do does clear correctly. And instead of these two, what we'll do is this one will call, we'll click on the C button, and after it types it in and the user clicks on C, it should clear it and it should bring the value back to 0. So if we save that, and there we go, that's now passed. Let's move on to the next function, which is, let me just bring it up. So let's work on the AC, so clear all functionality now. So this does AC correctly. I guess we could just call it that. So in order to test this, we have to do one value plus something else. So let's get the plus button. So we'll do that by doing screen.get by role. So that should give us the plus button. And then after we do this, we can do fire event dot click on plus button, just like that. And then let's click on another number here. So maybe we click on 2, and then what we should be able to see is if we do this 10 plus 2, we should see that this button is highlighted in white as it's showing you what you've got selected, which the AC will clear. So what we can also do here is assert that the style has been applied. So the way we can do that is if we do expect plus button dot to have style, and then in here we can give the style property, which is, I guess, border color of FFF. So that should have a style of white, and then we can actually go ahead and just click on the AC button. And as we can see in here, if we click on the AC button in here, it clears the value and also clears the operation that's selected. So now the output should be set to 0, and actually this should not have this style anymore. So what we can also do is have a negative on any of these assertions that we do. We could just put a dot not in front of it, and it will evaluate the negative effect of that. So if we go ahead and save that now, we should see that that works. Since we've done something different here, I just want to prove to you that if we do change this color to something else, this should also fail because it won't actually have that border color on that button. As you can see here, the style hasn't been matched. We'll just revert that back to what it was before. Save it, and now we've tested the AC functionality. The last thing I kind of want to test is this chaining functionality. So when we do 10 plus 10 plus, it turns into 20, and then we can continue, plus it goes into 30, plus 10 equals 40, and so on. So that's just the last thing. It's a bit more of a complicated test, but we can test that as well. So let me copy one of these tests again, and we'll start from here because this is a good base for us. And let's just do does chain operations correctly. This time I think I will use output stored in a variable, as I can test this a few times. So what I can do is start off with 10 plus 5, and then we won't do an equals, but what we can do is expect output to have text content of 5, as at this point, if you click 10 plus 5, this content will be 5, and then if we just hit that plus button again, this text content should now change to 15, as if it's been equaled. And then let's carry on by adding in some more values. So let's click on 1 0 again, and then the text content should now be 10 as we've entered in 10 into the application. So if I start off with 10 plus 5, I'm now on 5, but if I click plus again, it's equal to 15, but if I enter in 1, 0, it's on 10. But now if I click equals, then it should now equal 25, like this. I'll just remove this and change it with output. Yeah. It wasn't able to find, yeah, so I did this same mistake again. Keep writing 10 instead of 0. We're typing 10 by pressing the 2 different buttons, not just typing it out. And cool, there you go. We've tested majority of the functionality. We could also go ahead and test this, but I think you get the idea. We're testing all the different functionality inside the app, and this is what you can do, the kind of stuff you can cover. So this has been a brief intro into using Jest with React. One more thing I would like to just show you is the before each hook. So we can use this as a hook that we run before each app. So if we have certain things that we're running on every single test, we don't need to keep writing it in every single test itself. So for example, the render of the application, we can just do that once in this before each hook, and then it will happen every single time in the test. So now we can actually remove all of this. It's just simplify our code down a little bit. I'll just go ahead and remove these. And you can see they don't need to have the render app on every single test, and it will still work as you'd expect it to, just like that. So that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, then give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions, anything you're stuck with, anything you want me to go into further detail on or make a video about in the future, then you just let me know in the comment section down below. Or even if you just have any questions or get stuck by doing this, I'll be happy to try and help you. I hope this has helped you in some way. I appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next one.